Hello and welcome back to the next episode of Behind the Curtain, where we are going to be doing just a straight deconstruction this week, in fact. So, no fancy bullet points, no specific topics. We're going to be looking at the Wednesday trailer, fantastic Netflix series. And in the trailer, we see a number of the little magical things that appear throughout the series. And it gives us a whole wealth of things to talk about and apply many of the things that we have discussed in the previous week. So, if we flick across to the first shot, or the opening thing. So, Chris, what was the first thing in the trailer that grabbed your mind?
Let's see. This if there's visual effects, I can't spot it. I think it's all in camera. Uh,
And
but here, I think you're gonna have to extend this set. And so the question is, as the question so often is for when we're trying to figure this stuff out, is what is real and what is
okay,
digital?
so first of all, why would you want to do this digitally? Like, what? If you could just get a school courtyard and film it, surely you'd do that. Like, isn't that the best solution?
Yeah, it is. It's always the best solution if there's a place that looks like the thing that you want. The difficulty is if you can't find the place that you want.
Right.
So um,
So,
so then you're limited in terms of being able to art direct it, right? Because you might have a whole bunch of ideas of what this academy could look like, and every little thing that you change about it is going to move it more in the direction of what you want it to be. And we've spoken before about the advantage of going digital is the freedom element. And you think about this from an art director's point of view. If you were to shoot in a school that already existed, you're battling against the soul of that school, the reason why it was built in real life.
yeah.
Whereas in this series, presumably this school was built for purposes of this world.
Yeah.
Confession, I haven't watched it. I still haven't watched any of the stuff that we've done in Behind the Curtain, but this is
it's
the first time when you've actually watched something,
it's a
right?
really nuanced school. Yeah, it's here for a particular reason for particular people. So I think its identity and that sort of that visual look is very important. So that's something that the director would have been very sensitive to from the very beginning. So yeah, so by for here, when I look at this, there are a large number of elements of this shot that I feel are digital when I would expect them to be practical. Like, and
Yeah.
there's some things that are a little bit more obvious, like the tree in the middle. That seems to be like a CG, very particular design tree that they wanted in the middle of this courtyard. So, I mean, yeah, you could try and sculpt a tree and then like physically, practically, and then airlift it or whatever into a school courtyard. But as you say, you're limiting yourself. Like, so here I can understand why that tree is digital because it's like an iconic thing, especially if it needed to change or do something cool or magical. Then yeah, that would definitely be a reason for it. I don't think it does, but it's a very particular thing that they need it to look like that way. You can't just get any tree. So that makes
But
sense.
you could do it practically, right? Like so.
Yeah, like yeah, you could. It feels like that's doable as a practical sculpture and stick it in. And is there a reason in this shot, maybe not in this shot, that's not done? Like, I can't think of one. Like, I'd probably, as I say, if it's a set, I'd probably prefer to see it there. But this is the thing: is you're kind of assuming that you're in a courtyard when you're filming this. But I think there's so much in the shot that's digital. I'm not actually sure if you're in a courtyard. Like, if I look at the pillars in the foreground, I mean, there's some really nice, like on the floor, like if you look at the very beginning, like the very front, this little detail on the floor here, like the little things that are piled up next to the pillar there and stuff like that. Like there's some, yeah, some leaves and things like that. That feels like one of life's little details. Do you get
Yes.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but
I mean,
go on.
that's the kind of thing that we talk about a lot, right? Like, I mean, this stone not being so perfectly laid, being a little bit kicked out of joint through there. Um, that kind of speaks to me of happy accident. Of course, like when you're scanning things, when you're scanning something real and then you're rendering it digitally, you pick up all those happy accidents
As
at the
well.
same time. But
Absolutely.
but I agree. I'm convinced that this flaw is real. And this kind of takes us to, well, back to your first question of going like, well, why have any of it digital? And then if you are going, okay, well, it gives us freedom, then why not make everything digital? And in this shot, it's maybe kind of obvious. You don't want to make all of the people digital and have all of those problems, right? You could, of course, shoot all the people on a green screen and then comp them in, but why would you do that? One thing that we talk about a lot is actually when you have something real in your shot, it helps you sell the digital elements.
Yeah.
And so here, like, we're not certain exactly where the meeting point is, right? Exactly where real meets digital. Rich, see if you agree with me on this. I'm totally sold on this area where all of the actors are. Well, actually, bigger than the area I've drawn. These steps through here, basically anywhere where an actor is walking, I think that's real, because then you don't have to worry about their interaction with the ground and whatever. So all of the grass, this pool area in the middle, I'm buying that as digital as well. Sorry, real. Even this stuff around the base of the tree, I get it. The tree could be practical, could be. I don't know. I don't know.
It feels CG to me, or it's like a practical one made that hasn't been finished exactly like a real tree, if you get what I mean.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, because right.
it isn't a real tree. That's
Yeah.
the that's the thing that I'm that the
Yeah.
thing that screams at me strongest, if you get what I mean. Like,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
and that's a really interesting point, because sometimes if something is built practically or something is built CG, there's still the same telltale signs. Like, say, for example, if you have weathering or drip work or something like that, or, if you were to build something practically and say, okay, this has to be weathered, they've got to do some process to weather it and make it look like water's run down it or something like that.
Yeah.
Digital, we do a different set of processes, but for the same effect. And sometimes it's maybe like it doesn't matter which way it's done, you'll still see the approximations of those effects or the absence of them, and that's where it can be a telltale sign, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, this is kind of like what we were talking about in the previous episode, where we were looking at Cocaine Bear and basically saying, like, look, maybe you never do creature work, but the skills really overlap. And with practical and digital, it's the same thing, right? We're trying to sell something as real that definitely isn't real, because otherwise it would just be real. In terms of when we're doing props and effects work and stuff. So the considerations are much the same, and if we nail it or if we fail, it's it's for the same reasons. So yeah, I agree that the tree isn't real. I would want to build it, unless there's some episode where it actually moves and whatever, then obviously that's another thing. But where I think that the matte line is, basically, I think everything from the ground level up, right, is digital. So these columns, I think that's all a digital replacement. And then yeah, this keeps on going up all the way through there. So I think that yeah, what we would have seen in camera is basically that.
What about the door and the notice board in the background?
Yeah,
because there's something that feels real about them to me.
Yeah,
like, and therefore, was that part of the plate? So they might have found like a courtyard type shape with a building at the end, and then they've really changed the look of the building from there. Certainly the gargoyles and things like that, they all feel digitally added 100%. The shape of them is really weird and strange, like in a cool way that suits this world, but not one that you'd necessarily find or practically build, if you get what I mean.
Like this guy on the left, like, I wonder if you carved him out of stone in real life, whether he'd have enough attachment to the wall, you know what I mean, or whether at some point he's fallen down and crushed someone. That's often a mistake that I make when I'm doing digital stuff, is not considering that what would happen in the real world. And one mantra that's quite useful is form follows function. That's both for creatures, for things that evolve, but also things that are built. Everything is the way that it is for some functional reason. And in a digital world, we can do absolutely anything. And sometimes that's not great. And sometimes we want to constrain ourselves. And we've spoken about this with doing camera work, where, maybe we build an actual digital Russian arm or a digital jib or something that constrains us in a way so that we can't do fantastical, magical camera work, just to force ourselves closer to reality a bit. But anyway, Rich, to loop back to your point, I do buy these kind of background details. So potentially I'm wrong. Potentially, like, all of this stuff through here, and then because I think I buy that door as well. and the arch through here. So maybe all the walls that we're seeing are real.
Yeah.
They would then need to be, if this is all fake or digital in the front, which I really think that it is. But would be really, if anyone knows that we're wrong about any of this stuff, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, if this stuff is then digital, then you have to shadow that stuff in the background. And as we touched on with Cocaine Bear yesterday, digital shadowing isn't difficult to do, but it can often be difficult to pull off because you end up with kind of like, you know, soft blurriness.
Yeah.
Which I mean, here the shadowing looks good, but yeah, that would be the area that we'd be looking at if this was an extension, and then you'd have to force the shadowing on these people through there as well, which maybe actually could be what's happening because they're catching what looks like some direct light. I don't know. But another thing that I think is interesting is that the color of the brickwork through here, you know, the ground has a slight reddish hue, whereas these walls and the columns have a slight blue greenish hue. And of course, they can just be built out of different materials or whatever. But that's also what makes me what initially made me think that the matte line was you know, the ground. But if we're saying that yeah, potentially it's all this background here, then yeah, maybe in real life it's just made of a different material, or maybe it's been consciously graded because blue fits the palette of the show. And I don't know.
Yeah. The other thing when trying to determine something like this is I'd be look at what do people walk behind and in front of. Like, so the two girls in the foreground, they are walking across the shot, like screen, you know, across the left-hand side of the shot. And therefore anything that they walk in front of that is CG, you're going to have their outline. You're going to have to be able to put them in front of it, which either means they are green screened or someone has rotoed them. So if a rotoscope would be actually drawing all the way around the outside of them.
What I'm doing, but for every single frame.
Yeah, this is a perfect example of a rotoscoping process here. But no, that's not. It really isn't. Please don't listen to that. Like, but if you do that, then there are limitations. Like, for example, if that girl's hair or either their hair, if they flicked their head or their hair, and you had lots of little tiny strands of hair going all over the place, it might be very difficult to create a convincing outline of those characters. But notice the way that hair is kind of bundled up, carried up against the head. That can be one sign that someone's prepared that for the fact that you might need to rotate those characters.
Yeah.
Like, if that makes sense. That could be some good on-set VFX supervision there. Like, you know, if it's not important to the story that their hair isn't flicking around, then for heaven's sake, don't have it flicking around. Like,
yeah.
If CG needs to go behind it. Now, it's easy to put CG in front. Yeah. So say you've got those kids in the courtyard on screen right that are sitting at the desk. If those pillars are CG, which they may well be, it's easy to put CG pillars in front of a real piece of footage, but it's difficult to put CG behind elements in real footage, if that makes sense. So, or harder.
The way that I often choose to teach this is kind of like, imagine you have a photo. You could stick anything else on top of that photo. You know, like a real life photo, you just glue a thing on top and that's fine. But if you have someone in the photo and you want something to go behind that person, and you're doing it all just, you know, with a real practical photo, then you have to chop around that person and slot whatever thing is in behind, right? So it's the same thing. Like, yeah, we call it A over being, where you just have one thing and you can just go like, so imagine there was a big rock in the foreground, then you can just get a rock, boom, you stick it on top. That's, you know, easy. But as soon as you want to stick something behind something, then you need to separate those things. So if we had that rock back here, then, and it's this big, then we're going to have to chop out that person, which could be done through Roto, which is now moving towards an AI direction, thank God. So one day it'll be just a button click, hopefully, or if you're using green screens, that's another way of chopping out people, or blue screens, or red screens, whatever.
Whatever color, but
yeah, as long as it's different to what you've got in shot. Well, one other thing that I want to mention while we're here. Oh, sorry, that's not the thing. I just looked at those arms.
Yeah, look at that.
And yeah, if you this is related to some previously I mentioned, like the sculpting that person might not have considered the structural support of it because it's so front heavy. So someone is dying at some point as it falls onto their heads. And then similarly with these arms, like if you sculpted that in real life, you know, you were the guy hired to do this for this actual school in this world, then you're probably going to get fired as soon as those spindly arms kind of break off. So,
I mean, fair play to the person that cut that out of one lump of stone. I mean,
yeah,
that's some serious
yeah,
skill right there.
yeah.
Like, so yeah, few telltale signs there. But again, that we're not mocking the design here. We're not saying sort of like, oh, they haven't thought about the fact that that should be made of stone. Like, you know, this is an aesthetic that these guys have considered very carefully, and they want these unusual gargoyles, and that's part of the decision making process here. That this is, I mean, if you look at each gargoyle is weird in the way that it isn't
Yeah,
like a normal gargoyle that you would see, and it's not proportioned, it's not weighted in the same way. I would say that they are deliberately making that decision every single time to have like an impossible gargoyle in each location. Like,
definitely. And you know what? Like if these weren't really weird gargoyles, what I would recommend is if you wanted a gargoyle in your shot, just go to a church, learn how to do photogrammetry, right? That means taking scans using a camera, using photos, and just scan them in.
yeah,
Gargoyles will scan amazingly well because they're made out of stone. What you'll find when you're learning to scan is that shiny things don't scan well, rough things scan excellently. So,
things that
yeah, if you
move
wanted
don't
these,
scan well. Like,
hey,
things that move don't scan well.
things that move don't scan well. Yeah,
Static gargoyles that have been stationary for
yeah.
hundreds of years.
A gargoyle is actually the perfect thing to scan now that I'm
Yeah,
talking about it. So
yeah,
yeah, if you wanted them to be generic, then you know you can just go to a local place, scan them in, drop them in, and you're done. Whereas in this case, they've been designed specifically for the school, which is you know one of the beautiful things about being having the freedom to be able to art direct stuff is every single thing, every little area of the shot, every consideration can be run through a creative process, run through an
yeah,
art direct. The thing that I wanted to just mention before, it's a very small point, but um, you see like this drip through there. That's an example of I don't know specifically why there would be a drip there.
at
You know
that
what I mean?
point.
Like
Yeah,
yeah,
like,
yeah,
what's the
if
story
there
behind it? Yeah,
yeah, if there was a window there or if there was something where I'm like, okay, maybe it accumulates the water, and then obviously if there was a pipe just you know sticking out through here, then I go like, yeah, okay, the leaky pipe. Um, you get away with this stuff all the time, but at the same time, when you're doing the work, what can be really useful and what I try and train myself and my artists to do is just for every mark that you're doing, you're going, why am I making this mark? And so you're thinking about this mantra of form follows function all the time. You don't need to, because like I say, you know, no one is going to be watching this shot and going, aha, what's that drip?
yeah.
Some people will. I just did, but you don't need to worry about people who are going to do that. Everyone will just buy the work if it feels believable.
Yeah,
Um, but you know, and this idea that I'm trying to push through, it can go extreme, and sometimes you know I have the problem where I'll recommend that an artist does this and they just freeze because they're thinking about trying to you know analyze every single little thing to you know to the nth degree, and
yeah,
that's not what I'm saying. I'm just going. If you start training yourself now, then just with like what I want to be able to do is to walk up to your desk and go, stop. What is the reason for that decision?
yeah,
And if every decision that you do has a reason, that can be subconscious, you know, the end result of a shot is an accumulation of 100,000 decisions, some of them conscious, the majority of them subconscious. So that's the reason why you want to kind of train it as a skill and as a reflex. Sorry, I should say. And yeah, this kind of like let's say generic weather damage. We do it all the time because it's quick and easy. And like Rich was saying, you see it in practical work all the time as well, because then you can just you know batter the thing around. But if you're really thinking about every mark, then for the same amount of time that you're putting in, you can just get a little bit more realism in your work.
yeah. One other thing I'm going to draw attention to, which is a little bit of a strange thing, and it might not mean anything at all. It's the door at the background, the arch above it. Does that feel like reflected glass
Here,
above it? Yeah, and therefore, what is it reflecting? Like, you know, so is that the sky over effectively camera shoulder left?
I don't
Like,
think it is. I think that it's wood. I'm looking at the other one here and going, That's exactly the
Oh,
same.
okay, cool. Sorry, because that's the sort of thing where, you know, if that front section of the building hadn't existed, then it probably would have reflected the sky, and then when you put
Yeah.
the rest of the building in, then you maybe have to reconsider that reflection. Like, but if it's wood, if it's like panel sort of thing, it's hard for me to see. Like, but
Yeah, reflective stuff is a pain in the ass because
yeah,
you know both in real reflective stuff, then the problem that you have is the camera or crew getting reflected, and then they need to get painted out in post. That's a very very common thing. But then the opposite thing is also true. Like for example, if these pillars were made out of chrome, let's say, then as these girls walk in front of them, then they need to be reflected in that chrome pillar. And if that chrome pillar is digital, then well, they're not. So they're not naturally going to be
yeah,
reflected in it because the digital thing will only reflect the digital world. So then you would have to hopefully not make them, but you would have to fake it in some way, whether you did that in compositing or whether you just made a basic thing for them and moved it across just enough to get something that felt like their reflection,
yeah.
is up to you. But yeah, reflection is one of the killers. Reflections and shadows are really a key part of the meeting point between what is real and what is digital. And when you get it right, no one's going to slap you on the back and say, well done, because it's going to be like, obviously that thing reflects or
Yeah.
obviously that shadows. But when you get it wrong, that's when things start to fall apart.
Or they won't even realize you did anything. Like,
Yeah.
and therefore you
Yeah.
won't get any congratulations at all. Like,
Yeah.
okay, great. So moving on.
Well, so here's an interesting thing just with this shot, because now we're super close up. So this kind of reinforces your idea because I don't think that this stuff is digital. I'm certain that it's not. So this kind of reinforces your idea of um, this background area being all real and the extension being the columns and things. Because then that means for shots like this, then you could just use the same set, right? And
Yeah.
that would explain why the doors feel real. And yeah, so I guess nothing for us to break down here. Let's scoot on. Do we think there's an extension here?
This is a really interesting room. There are rooms this size that exist in real life. Whether they have statues like that at the end of it, like, so there's probably kind of stuff being digitally added. Remember what we said before? If you had to put a digital statue at the end of that room, then anything that's real that's in front of it, we would need to have the silhouette for. So we would have to be able to have the outline of Wednesday, the character in this case, because she's going to go in front of stuff on that back wall. Only for where she crosses the back wall. But what are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine a place like this existing. You know, you see halls like this in Vienna, for example. But and the thing is, like, I buy these columns here. So then, yeah, that would mean that literally just that end is extension. I can't tell. So if it is, it's a great job. If it's actually built as a set, then great job. If it's a real set, then great, nice place. Um,
Yeah.
I'm pondering whether the God rays are digitally added. You know, God rays are not that difficult to add. They're not that difficult to create on set either, as long as you have enough, you know, fog on set. But I'm kind of looking at the strength of the God ray, and then looking at like this guy, for example, and the black bit of him, or that guy in the background, and going, if you had a God ray that strong, would the room not be filled with so much smoke that those blacks would start to become gray? I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, it
In,
is interesting that that haziness doesn't touch the right hand side of shot so
yeah,
much, so it feels like it's definitely been sort of, at least enhanced. Um,
yeah. So I don't know, Rich. I'm stumped on this one. This shot doesn't give us any more information. I'm leaning more towards
it's a
thinking that
real
real.
room. It's just a real
Yeah,
room, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
like as soon as you start to film stuff from different angles, and each time it's really convincing, it kind of, for me, it adds to the argument that this is actually a location. This is actually,
yes,
where so they've done things, to maybe enhance it in VFX, like the God rays, etc. They might have just pushed them a little bit further in VFX, but actually it is a place. And I that's definitely the way that I'm, now that I've seen this shot, that's definitely the way that
Yeah.
I'm leaning. Like, to be honest, with the first shot, it was just the nature of the statues. It was a little bit
Mhm.
like, they felt like the gargoyles in the first example,
Yeah.
where they were like, that's something that they've had to custom build because they're a bit weird. But no, it's just they found a weird place, which is very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a tiny bit of creature here. Now we've got that shadow, which if you're really like smart, you could definitely just have that shadow in camera. I'd definitely be lazy enough to do that in post. And then we've got the foot of the creature that I have no idea what this creature looks like, because I haven't seen this yet. But this kind of shot of a foot, a foot entering shot is, I don't know. I've done a bunch of these, right? It's a fairly common way of framing a character, and there's an interesting thing here because in the last Behind the Curtain we were talking about digital creatures, talking about the whole process that you have with them, where you have to sculpt them, but you also have to put muscles inside, and if they've got fur, then you have to put that on, and and whatever else, the secondary motion, that jiggling of fat, or adding in saliva, or whatever it is, and it's very, very complex. And actually, once you add all of those things together, it's not necessarily as the end result is not necessarily the sum of its parts, if that makes sense. Like, you get it all together in shot, and it just isn't as good as what you'd hope. And so then what you often do is you just fix it for that shot. And doing shot specific work is very, very common. So, for example, in this shot through here, what I would be looking at if I was delivering this shot is going, okay, in order to sell the story here, which is of a somewhat weighted foot, I guess. I don't know how big the creature is, but it's definitely carrying its own weight as it's pushing that arm down. And the animation, I think, does a beautiful job of selling that. I think there might even be some secondary movement in the tendon through there. No, I'm not sure there is. But what I would look for in this shot is to literally, just for this shot, you can do what we call shot sculpting, which is where you do a sculpt that is animated just for this shot. So I would imagine like a tendon running down here. Even if it wasn't in the design, I might create it just for this shot, because this is where we're getting quite a lot of read. And as it puts on its weight, I just have a little bit of a beat of a tendon coming on and then dropping off. And I remember we had a very similar shot in John Carter of a foot of one of the Tharks, these four-armed aliens pushing down in shot. And one of the creature TDs, the creature technical directors, had done exactly that, and just put in this little muscular tendinous beat as the foot dropped. And I remember the animation supervisor going, "That's it. That's our Oscar right there." Because we were kind of hoping for the visual effects Oscar, but actually no one watched the film and we didn't get an Oscar. But that is, I think, it was a really nice example of how to sell that shot. And the reality is, like, you're never going to build something so complex that it works in every shot. As we've spoken about before, what we're doing is we are creating the cheapest reproduction of real life that we can get away with. And often what that means is that you just cater to it in shot rather than making it perfect beforehand.
So you're saying there to build like a creature that had all the detail and all the stuff in the rig and everything to allow it to sort of show this sort of tendon flex in its ankle on this particular shot, to have that just shipping around in the asset for all shots would be a really silly thing to do. Yeah, because it's unnecessarily complicated, unnecessarily heavy. Like, that's and then solve things on a per shot basis as well. Like, just to give you that extra layer of love.
Yeah, I mean, I remember sitting in the conversation where, we were having a meeting about taking the faces we were doing to the next level of realism, and one point raised by one of the team was the blood actually, sorry, the color of a face actually changes color according to the beating of the heart. So there'll be nuances of difference based off of in between heartbeats, something like that, right? And I thought, well, if you're getting to the point where the thing that is the most important thing is the color of the face changing,
You've done it. You've done
Yeah,
it.
don't worry about it. You're fine. You're fine. But
Like,
if the stuff we're doing isn't working, then probably the most important thing is more important than that.
damn the beat. Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and when you're working at things at that level, then yeah, you're probably overthinking it. I mean, even, how many times are we going to see this foot in shot? Because you could even make the argument to just not overthink it too much, drop it in shot, and then see how it looks in shot, and make changes. So like this little claw back there looks great, right? It's got nice texture. It's darker at the root, getting lighter towards the tip, as we'd expect. Works great. It's probably the only shot that it's ever going to matter in. So it wouldn't be the end of the world if it didn't look great. Because as soon as you drop it in shot and it doesn't look great, then you go, oh, we'll make that better. The consideration that I make here is how many shots do we see something in? So, for example, the robots that we did in Outside the Wire, you see a lot of the same kind of robot in a lot of shots. So that's not a situation where you want to go, okay, well, we'll just fix it in shot, because then you're fixing it 1,000 times. Whereas you might have something that needs to look absolutely amazing, it needs to look better than Gollum, but you only see it in 2 shots or even 10 shots. Doesn't just get it into shot, see what works, see what doesn't work. Go through your process of figuring out the most important thing, like we discussed in the previous video. And in that way, you can get to like really high results with 100th of the effort of, over engineering to the point where you're thinking about its heart beating,
Absolutely. I want to, I mean, this is all amazing stuff. I want to keep a little bit of momentum because we've only got a few minutes left, and there is a shot that I want to talk about with the typewriter. I don't know if
yeah, the thing in. If we go past, we can
probably near the beginning, I think. Like, there we go. Yeah, because it's just a beautiful shot. Like the whole thing, it's got this really sort of lovely feel to it and things. But it's also a really interesting one because historically, the hand thing has always been done with a real hand. Like
thing the hand thing,
thing. Yeah, the thing. It's always been just like a real hand. But now, like there's the option of doing this completely CG. So, would you choose to do it CG? Is it CG? What are the telltale signs? I'm just wondering, can we play through it and have a quick look? So to me, there's something that feels incredibly real about it.
Yeah.
Like, so yeah, there's scars on it and everything like that. And those are scars that I imagine like no real hand would have. So there's probably some really cool special makeup prosthetics work that's gone on the actual hand there. I don't think that's a CG scar that's been added, but the actual performance is coming from somebody real moving their hand. And that hand isn't cut off at the wrist, I hope. So you've got like 10 seconds of before the blood goes. Like, twiddle those fingers. Like, so what do we think is going on? Do we think that this is a digital stump on a real hand, or like what are the options here? Is it a hand that actually goes down through the desk in some clever way? Like, what do we think?
I think firstly, I totally agree. It's a real hand. It's horrible to say as a visual effects artist, like that looks too good to be digital. But the complexity that you have here is very, very difficult, even on a shot sculpting level. But if we look at kind of like these wrinkles, it's really easy for us to actually get a hand with those wrinkles, because we can just scan a hand and it's going to be perfect. But the thing is, these wrinkles are coming from the fact that this finger is currently getting raised and pulled back, right? And they will, as the finger taps down on the keyboard, will disappear. And yes, we can do that. We just don't want to. It's just because you have to do it for this joint, you have to do it for this joint, this joint. It's a ton of work. So you would look for any way that, you always look for any way that you can do it real. There's a slight misconception people have about, us as visual effects artists. It's like, no, we're film fans too. We want to see it as real, but you can't always do it as real. The scars, obviously, assuming that we're saying the hand is real, you're not same reason you're not going to chop someone's hand off to get the shot. You're probably not going to scar them. There's no reason why this would be makeup. The only reason is if he'd lost a chunk of the hand, and if that was an important story beat, then you can't. Makeup can only be additive, which is why we see the scar as a raised thing here. So I think that all the scars are coming from a makeup artist. You could add them digitally, of course you could, but why would you? So what I think is happening here is that it's just, you know, someone's arm is just coming to camera there, and the arm is just getting removed.
But
And then
this is really important for like for preparation of the shot though, because like if you're going to do that, you know that when you paint that arm out, you're going to see the desk underneath.
yes,
So what sort of things can you do to make that easier for the VFX artists? Like
uh,
is there anything you can do on set? Like, you know, can you sort of film sort of empty plates, clean things, sort of reference, sort of how do you best do that?
yes, yeah. I mean, firstly, yeah, you can shoot what we call a clean plate, which is just a plate without, you know, so it wouldn't have the actor's hand in or anything like that. Um, and that would be literally just a typewriter and the desk, because then, you know, when you shoot this shot with the actor in it, remember, we're not going to see any of this because this is all going to have the arm in it. So
Yeah,
all
physical
of this is
arm
going
in
to
the
be
way. Yeah.
obscured. But if you've shot the exact same thing without the arm in it, then you can just essentially copy and paste this area from the clean plate, the shot
Yeah.
without the arm, and put it back in. That becomes more difficult if the camera's moving. This is what we mentioned in a previous video of like, yeah, still cameras are your friend. But any which way, having a clean plate is going to be massively useful. And outside of that, taking reference from set is always amazing. It doesn't get done enough. Like sometimes just having someone take a photo of a thing can be really useful. You know, we can imagine what this area of desk looks like because it's going to look very much like any other area of the desk. But oftentimes you just don't have that information. So even just taking photos from set is going to be great. And more, as people are getting more comfortable with scanning techniques, whether that's photogrammetry or LiDAR, which are the two key ways of scanning, scanning anything and everything can always be really useful, because then you can just have it as a digital render. In this case, I wouldn't. Like if we didn't have a clean plate, then you'd probably just kind of clone a bit from somewhere else and drop it in. But of course, you also then have the consideration of the shadow that's being cast, because the shadow that's going to be cast by a full arm is not necessarily going to be very visible and will be different, the shadow being cast by this hand. So that's a thing that you can probably just
You could actually take like a model of a hand, practical
yeah,
hand, onto set, stick it in place just to see what does an object of this size, this shape, how does the shadow cast? So then you've got the reference for your VFX artist to work towards.
right. And how does the shadow cast on this wood, which is, you
Yes,
know,
with that
all
sort of
broken up? So
reflectivity and
that, for
yeah.
example, and yeah, they may well have done that, you know, to kind of appreciate the blurriness of this shadow compared to the sharpness of
And then
that shadow.
and then what you're left with is this join point between the CG and the real hand, which here is quite cleverly done because it's like the hand has locked its wrist down into place, so it's static, it's not moving too much, it's not so complex. And I think that's why it leapt out as me as a shot to talk about, because it's just
Yeah,
a very clever combination of getting that real life performance of a real hand doing real things and all that sort of reality that goes with it, and just using VFX minimally but in a really effective way to bring the shot home. Like,
yes, yeah. I mean, this is a hell of a meeting point to manage, right? The meeting point being where the real thing meets the digital thing, because here the meeting point um, has to be within the body of the hand, right? Like a much easier meeting point to manage is okay. So if you look at me in camera, replacing my hand here,
yeah,
because then you can just literally chop it off at the sleeve, and then we can go, okay, have digital hand and have real sleeve, right?
yeah,
Whereas where the meeting point, if the meeting point has to happen across the surface of the skin, it's much more difficult to navigate, because you've got to make sure that your skin matches perfectly.
yeah.
So assuming that well, assuming that we're right and this isn't a chopped off hand and this is digital, then yeah, this stump is going to be digital, and the meeting point, I don't know. I think it's actually being blended softly through the
Cross
body of the hand
into
like
that
that, is my
area.
guess. It's not
Yeah.
that line. That's a line of light. I think it's like, because it feels a little bit softer through there. So I think it's, I don't know. I think it's something like that, you know?
But it's
Uh,
done well. Done
yeah,
well.
blending it through the body of the hand. Yeah. Okay, wait. It's interjection. I was wrong, and I just want to hold my hands up to that. Straight after recording this, I was recommended a video through YouTube. It's like they knew a video called The Making of Thing, I think it is. I'll put the link in the description. I'm sure it'll be very easy for you guys to find. And it turns out that that wrist area of the hand is prosthetic. So I was right about where the meeting point was. It was still in this area of the hand as the prosthetic bleeds into the hand. So I wasn't completely off base, but it wasn't a digital extension, which is really interesting. And I think the way that they handle the meeting point is apparently much smarter than what I would have done. I think it's really effective to do that, to just have that extra bit of wrist floating up and then have the hand kind of, the arm kind of hidden underneath there. You of course need to go through the same process of removing the arm and replacing it, exactly like me and Rich have been discussing. But it's a smarter way of handling the meeting point, I think. So anyway, on with the waffling from me and Rich.
We are at 40 minutes, and I think that's our allotted slot, Chris, I'm afraid, for timing.
You notice, Rich, that we only ever get through 1/3 of a trailer. That seems to be
it's the rule.
No,
it's just when you've got shots of this level, like there's just so much interesting stuff to talk about, which it's really enjoyable, and I love the challenge, and I learn a lot when we do these, because it's just practicing what we do every day as VFX artists, just going through it and really trying to deconstruct things. So I enjoy doing it a lot. It's good fun. But well, I hope you guys have enjoyed it too. As ever, if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to see us cover in these episodes, then please do just get in touch through any of our social media, any other way possible, because we're going to continue driving this series forward. We've covered a large number of areas now: environments, characters, sort of specific sort of digital creatures, and then some of these shots on Wednesday, which are sort of bringing lots of these things together with practical effects as well. If there's anything you'd like us to focus on more, then please, we can make that the topic of a video in the future. We'd be more than happy to do so. So please let us know and join us in the future. Cheers, take care, and goodbye.